Black World, Black World, Black World TV.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Black World TV, the new black media. Today's broadcast is about Michael Bloomberg, who apologizes for the Stop-and-Frisk. He says, "I was wrong." Well, you got that right. Ahead of a potential Democratic presidential run, former Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg of New York on Sunday reversed his long-standing support of the aggressive stop-and-frisk policing strategy that he pursued for a decade and that led to the disproportionate stopping of black and Latino people across the city. "I was wrong," Mr. Bloomberg declared, "and I am sorry." Now, before I continue, let me give you this disclaimer that those close to Mr. Bloomberg have told him bluntly that running for president without addressing the stop-and-frisk matter first was a non-starter. So you understand what the agenda is, family. But I digress. The speech, Mr. Bloomberg's first since he re-emerged as a possible presidential candidate, was a remarkable concession by a 77-year-old billionaire not known for self-doubt. That a pillar of his 12-year mayoralty was a mistake that he now regrets. And while I'm on that subject, let me just state for the record, for a candidate supposedly running for the top seat of running the number one country in the world, the United States of America, I find it troubling that for 12 years you now come to an understanding how wrong it was. That tells me that you have poor judgment skills, not worthy of sitting in the Oval Office. But I digress. Speaking before the Congression at the Christian Cultural Center, a black megachurch in Brooklyn, Mr. Bloomberg delivered his apology in the heart of one of the communities most affected by his policing policies, and at a location that nodded to the fact that should he decide to run for president, African American voters or Native Black American voters would be a crucial Democratic constituency that he would need to win over. Well, that's very true. Mr. Bloomberg's policing record is seen as one of his biggest potential vulnerabilities in 2020. Few Democrats have so evocative a record on criminal justice. There were millions of street stops heavily targeting black and brown young men during his 12-year tenure. And in the last two presidential nomination contests, black voters helped determine the winner, elevating Barack Obama in 2008 and Hillary Clinton in 2016. Until Sunday, Mr. Bloomberg had steadfastly, and his critics say stubbornly, defended stop and frisk, mocking only a few months ago the very notion of undertaking an apology tour for his broader record. Mr. Bloomberg stood behind the program, which gave New York police officers sweeping authority to stop and search anyone they suspected of a crime, even after a federal judge ruled in 2013 that it violated the constitutional rights of foundational black Americans or Native black Americans. Forgive many of us for questioning apologies a decade late and on the eve of a presidential run, said Jumaine Williams, the current New York City public advocate. Quote, "It is not nearly enough to erase the legacy of the systemic abuses of stop, question, and frisk on the people whose lives were harmed by over-policing, nor the communities criminalized by it." Yes, because we know the statistics and we know the numbers proved that the Stop and Frisk program under Michael Bloomberg's command failed tremendously. But I digress. Moments after services ended at the church, Mr. Bloomberg called the Reverend Al Sharpton, a prominent civil rights leader, which I don't know where they got that from, but that's what they claim, who sparred with Mr. Bloomberg over stop and frisk during his mayoralty from his car to ask Mr. Sharpton to ask if Mr. Sharpton had watched his speech. Quote, "You can't expect people like us to forgive and forget after one speech," unquote, Mr. Sharpton said. He told Mr. Bloomberg, promising to hold him to the same standard as other politicians, such as former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr., who has walked back his past support for tough on crime, drug legislation, and Senator Bernie Sanders. At the program's peak, the racial disparities in its enforcement were jarring. Of 575,000 stops conducted in 2009, Black and Latino people were 9 times as likely as white people to be targeted by the police. Oh, the white privilege. Even though once stopped, they were no more likely to actually be arrested. In 2011, police officers stopped and questioned about 685,000 New Yorkers, and 87% of those stopped were Black and Latino. This is a travesty of justice, and this was all done under Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg. So, after Mr. Bloomberg stepped down from the pulpit and returned to his seat in the front row, the church's pastor, the Reverend A. R. Bernard, a longtime ally and former advisor to Mr. Bloomberg, shook the former mayor's hand. Quote, "Come on, CCC," which is the acronyms for the church. The church's name is, I mentioned the Christian Cultural Center, CCC. "Come on, CCC. Show some love and appreciation," unquote, Mr. Bernard said, amid tepid applause. So, in other words, the good reverend of the mega church asked the members to, turn the other cheek. Forgive and forget, in other words. And on code, the Black churchgoers gave a tepid applause, exactly what they should have done. And so, once again, the church is always trying to influence Native Black Americans. But nonetheless, one of the churchgoers by the name of Amira, and I'll just leave it at that, who is 49, a teacher who lives in Far Rockaway and attended the church service, was incensed by Mr. Bloomberg's appearance. Quote, "This is about what he wants," unquote, Miss Beatty said. Quote, he didn't come to CCC Church because he's here to promote a CCC initiative. He's here to promote a Bloomberg initiative, unquote. You see, this foundational Black American, she knows exactly what time it is. But I digress. Mr. Bloomberg had consistently stood behind the program until now. Quote, I think people, the voters, want low crime, Mr. Bloomberg told the New York Times last year. Quote, they don't want kids to kill each other. Well, in fact, Mr. Bloomberg had come to this very same church located in East New York in 2012 to defend Stop-and-Frisk and answer mounting criticism around it. Well, I'm not surprised he did that back in 2012 because, as I stated just a minute ago, after all, he knows the good reverend of that church. And so, I'm sure there's been money exchanged and favors provided. So, of course, he's welcomed at that church. Don't find that unusual or just a coincidence. That is by design. But I digress. The reversal on Stop-and-Frisk is the starkest in a series of steps that Mr. Bloomberg has taken in the last 2 weeks to lay the groundwork for entering the Democratic presidential primary, a step that appears increasingly imminent. Quote, well, he has already filed to be on the primary ballot in 2 states, Arkansas and Alabama. His advisors have outlined a strategy to leverage his personal fortune by competing in the broader map of states on Super Tuesday, March 3rd, and he announced plans to spend $100 million on digital ads criticizing Donald Trump. So again, as I close this broadcast, I want to remind you that the article clearly states that those close to Mr. Bloomberg have told him bluntly that running for president without addressing the Stop-and-Frisk matter first was a non-starter. In other words, they gave you their agenda and then they told you what they're trying to do. And this man, Michael Bloomberg, is trying to run for president and he's trying to get the black vote. I know foundational Black Americans, American descendants of slavery, Native Black Americans are not falling for the tricks. Tricks are for kids, silly rabbit. This is Black World TV, the new black media, bringing you yet another broadcast in hopes that you like and share, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Peace out.